The planet Xylos hummed with an energy unlike anything found on Earth. Twin suns cast long violet shadows across crystalline forests, their branches shimmering with bioluminescent fungi. The air, thick with the scent of ozone and something akin to overripe mangoes, vibrated with the clicking and whirring of the native Xylossian life. These weren't your typical little green men. The Xylossians resembled massive, armored crustaceans, their bodies segmented and iridescent. They communicated through a complex series of clicks, whistles, and pheromone emissions, a language as alien as their biology. Their cities were sprawling complexes of polished obsidian, interconnected by shimmering tubes that pulsed with light. Gravity was slightly lower here, giving everything a buoyant, ethereal quality. Into this bizarre tapestry stumbled one very out-of-place human. His name was Dave. Just Dave. No last name, no fancy titles, just Dave. He wasn't a soldier, or an ambassador, or even a particularly bright scientist. He was, by his own admission, mostly winging it. Dave had arrived on Xylos courtesy of a malfunctioning experimental teleporter and a truly spectacular string of bad decisions. Currently, Dave was attempting to blend in, which mostly involved wearing a slightly too small Xylossian exosuit and trying very hard not to scratch. The suit, scavenged from a crashed survey drone, smelled faintly of ammonia and existential dread. He shuffled awkwardly through a bustling Xylossian marketplace, a cacophony of clicks and whistles assaulting his ears. Dave's mission, if you could call it that, was simple. Don't get dissected. So far he was succeeding, mostly because the Xylossians seemed utterly bewildered by him. They'd pause in their clicking conversations, their multifaceted eyes blinking in unison as they observed him. His gait, his smell, his complete lack of understanding of their complex social cues, it all added up to something they couldn't quite categorize. Was he a threat? A pet? A particularly pathetic form of entertainment? One thing was clear. Dave was an anomaly. He clutched a small tattered guidebook entitled Xylos, a Traveler's Highly Unlikely Companion, desperately trying to decipher the local customs. According to the book, direct eye contact was considered an act of aggression, whistling was reserved for mating rituals, and any attempt to haggle over the price of nutrient paste was punishable by ritual humiliation. Dave sighed. He was pretty. Sure, he'd already violated at least 2 of those rules. He stopped in front of a stall selling what appeared to be crystallized insects on sticks. Hello? He ventured, his voice echoing strangely inside the exosuit. The Xylossian vendor, a particularly large specimen with impressive-looking pincers, tilted its head. A series of rapid clicks emanated from its carapace. Dave consulted his guidebook. Is price good? He stammered, pointing at the insect sticks. He winced. He was pretty sure he'd just asked if the vendor was romantically available. Adiawand. Xylossian emitted a series of clicks that sounded suspiciously like laughter. It then extended a pincer towards Dave, offering him a stick. Dave hesitated. He really wasn't sure what crystallized insects tasted like, but he figured it was better than being ritually humiliated. He took the stick, offering a nervous smile. This was going to be a long trip. The first misunderstanding arose during a Xylossian purification ceremony. Dave, still clad in the ill-fitting exosuit, had wandered into a large obsidian chamber filled with chanting Xylossians. They were rhythmically waving what looked like oversized tuning forks, emitting a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the floor. The guidebook vaguely mentioned the ceremony as a way to harmonize with the planetary resonance, but Dave mostly saw an opportunity to take a nap. He leaned against a nearby pillar, stifling a yawn. The humming was actually quite soothing, and the dim violet light was easy on the eyes. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the vibrations wash over him. Big mistake. Apparently, closing your eyes during a purification ceremony was a sign of profound disrespect, akin to mooning the Pope during High Mass. The chanting abruptly stopped. All eyes, or rather, all multifaceted eyes, turned towards Dave. A wave of Clicks, sharp and accusatory, filled the chamber. Dave, startled awake, blinked in confusion. Everything okay?" he mumbled, scratching his head through the exosuit. A particularly imposing Xylossian, adorned with extra-large mandibles and a decorative array of bioluminescent orbs, detached itself from the group. It approached Dave with a slow, deliberate gait, its clicking growing louder and more insistent. This, Dave guessed, was not a good sign. He fumbled for his guidebook, frantically flipping through the pages. Ceremonies. Involuntary ocular closure during planetary harmonization rituals is considered. Oh dear. The Xylossian stopped directly in front of him, its gaze intense. Dave braced himself for a lecture, or worse, ritual, humiliation involving nutrient paste. Instead, the Xylossian extended a pincer towards him, offering a small polished stone. Dave stared at it, bewildered. The guidebook offered no explanation for this gesture. Is this a peace offering?" he asked tentatively. The Xylossian clicked again, this time with a hint of curiosity. Dave took the stone. It was surprisingly warm to the touch, and it seemed to vibrate slightly. He pocketed it, figuring it was better to accept the gift than risk further offending the locals. "Thank you?" he said, his voice laced with uncertainty. The Xylossian simply turned and rejoined the ceremony, leaving Dave to wonder what had just happened. Later, while attempting to decipher the functions of a Xylossian nutrient dispenser, which looked suspiciously like a glorified garbage disposal, Dave noticed a group of Xylossian technicians meticulously calibrating a large, cone-shaped device. The device was made of a strange metallic substance that shimmered with an internal light. Wires and tubes snaked across its surface, connecting it to a complex array of control panels. This, he suspected, was the Harmonizer. According to his trusty guidebook, the Harmonizer was a vital piece of Xylossian technology, used to maintain planetary equilibrium by emitting focused sonic vibrations. It was also heavily guarded and strictly off-limits to unauthorized personnel. Naturally, Dave was immediately interested. He casually strolled towards the device, pretending to be deeply engrossed in his guidebook. He'd learned that acting, like he knew what he was doing, seemed to confuse the Xylossians just enough to buy him some time. He reached the Harmonizer and began poking around, examining the various wires and tubes. One of the technicians, a young Xylossian with particularly bright blue markings, noticed him. It emitted a series of rapid clicks, its mandibles twitching nervously. Dave ignored it, continuing his inspection. He noticed a small, unlabeled button on the side of the device. Curiosity piqued. He pressed it. The Harmonizer emitted a loud, discordant screech, causing all the technicians to jump back in alarm. The lights flickered and the ground vibrated violently. Dave winced. "Oops," he muttered. He was pretty sure he'd just violated at least 3 more Xylossian customs. The Xylossians, initially curious about the strange, bumbling human in the oversized suit, were now starting to get suspicious. Dave's repeated blunders, his uncanny ability to disrupt their meticulously planned routines, and his blatant disregard for their sacred traditions were raising red flags, or rather, triggering flashing violet lights in their multifaceted eyes. The Council of Harmonious Resonance convened an emergency session, debating the potential threat posed by this unpredictable Earthling. Councillor Zorgon, a particularly influential Xylossian known for his unwavering adherence to protocol, voiced the prevailing sentiment. "His actions are illogical. He violates our customs, tampers with our technology, and expresses no remorse. Such behavior is indicative of either profound mental deficiency or deliberate sabotage." The other councillors clicked in agreement, their bioluminescent orbs dimming with concern. Meanwhile, Dave, oblivious to the growing unease, was busy attempting to brew a cup of tea using the Harmonizer's power source. He'd discovered that the device, when overloaded, could produce a brief surge of heat, perfect for boiling water. The tea itself was synthesized from various alien flora he'd scavenged, resulting in a brew that smelled vaguely of burnt rubber and tasted even worse. Still, it was tea. He poured himself a cup, took a tentative sip, and grimaced. "Needs more sugar," he muttered. He then proceeded to rummage through his exosuit's storage compartments, eventually producing a small, crumpled packet of artificial sweetener. It was a relic from his pre-expedition days, a testament to his unwavering commitment to the perfect cup of tea, even in the face of intergalactic bewilderment. The Xylossian authorities, led by the stern-faced Commander Krill, decided to initiate a formal investigation. They dispatched a squad of heavily armored Xylossian guards to Dave's designated living quarters, a small, sterile chamber that he had quickly transformed into a chaotic mess of discarded exosuit parts, empty nutrient paste containers, and half-finished engineering projects. The guards, armed with sonic disruptors and stun nets, cautiously entered the chamber, their mandibles twitching nervously. They found Dave sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by a cloud of steam, meticulously stirring his tea with a repurposed data cable. He looked up at them, a picture of serene contentment. "Oh, hello," he said cheerfully. "Care for a cuppa?" Commander Krill, taken aback by Dave's nonchalant demeanor, struggled to maintain his composure. "Earthling," he clicked sternly, "you are under investigation for violations of Xylossian protocol, unauthorized modification of planetary harmonization, equipment, and general disruptive behavior." Dave blinked at him, his expression unreadable. "Disruptive behavior? I'm just trying to make a decent cup of tea." He gestured towards the steaming mug. "Go on, try it. It's an acquired taste." The guards exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how to proceed. The situation was rapidly deteriorating into a surreal comedy of errors, a clash between Xylossian, bureaucratic rigidity and Dave's unwavering, if slightly eccentric, humanity. The mystery of the Harmonizer and Dave's strange obsession with it deepened with each passing moment. The Xylossian High Council assembled, their carapaces gleaming under the violet glow of the central chamber. Commander Krill presented Dave. Before them, bound not by physical restraints but by a complex web of bureaucratic regulations he couldn't possibly comprehend. The air crackled with anticipation. They believed they were on the verge of uncovering a plot that threatened the very foundation of their society. "Human," Counselor Zorgon boomed, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You stand accused of tampering with the Harmonizer, a device of paramount importance to the stability of our planet. Explain yourself." Dave, looking remarkably unfazed, shrugged. "Tampering? I just plugged it in." He gestured vaguely towards the Harmonizer, which was now emitting a series of rhythmic pulses, accompanied by a strange bubbling sound. "Needed to boil some water, you know. Can't have a decent cuppa without hot water." The council exchanged bewildered clicks. "Boil? Water?" Zorgon repeated, clearly struggling to process the information. "But the Harmonizer, it regulates atmospheric pressure, controls tectonic activity. It's not a water boiler," Dave sighed dramatically. "Look, I'm no expert, but it's pretty obvious, isn't it? You stick a metal coil in there, crank up the power, and bingo, hot water on demand." He reached into his exosuit and pulled out a battered travel kettle. "See? Same principle, just bigger." He held up the kettle for emphasis, nearly dropping it in the process. The Xylossian counselors stared at the kettle, then back at the Harmonizer, then back at Dave. The realization dawned slowly, like the first rays of sunlight piercing through a murky swamp. The Harmonizer, the pinnacle of their technological achievement, the key to their planetary stability, was essentially a giant kettle. Commander Krill stammered, but the schematics, the complex algorithms, the resonating frequencies." Dave chuckled, a low rumbling sound. "Yeah, well, turns out all that fancy stuff just boils down to heating water. Bit of overkill, if you ask me." He winked. No pun intended. A wave of stunned silence washed over the chamber. The Xylossians, a species renowned for their unwavering logic and technological prowess, had been outsmarted by a human with a travel kettle and a thirst for tea. The implications were staggering. Their entire understanding of the Harmonizer, their entire planetary defense system, was based on a fundamental misunderstanding. The bubbling sound from the Harmonizer grew louder, accompanied by a distinct whistling noise. Dave grinned. Ah, perfect timing. Kettle's boiled. Anyone fancy a cup? He pulled out a packet of synthetic tea bags and began brewing, completely oblivious to the chaos he had unleashed. The fate of the Xylossian civilization, it seemed now, rested on the strength of a good, strong cuppa. The violet chamber fell deathly silent save for the Harmonizer's cheerful whistling. Counselor Zorgon's mandibles twitched uncontrollably. Commander Krill's usually rigid posture slumped with disbelief. The pinnacle of Xylossian engineering, reduced to a glorified tea kettle by a creature who didn't even appreciate the subtle nuances of sonic pressure calibration. Dave, blissfully unaware of the existential crisis brewing around him, poured boiling water into a chipped mug. Milk and sugar? He offered, holding up a questionable-looking carton of synth milk. The counselors just stared, their multifaceted eyes wide with a mixture of horror and utter bewilderment. Suddenly, a high-pitched alarm blared through the chamber. Red lights flashed. A synthesized voice announced, "Atmospheric pressure destabilizing, tectonic activity spiking, planetary integrity compromised." Panic erupted among the Xylossians. They scurried about, clicking and screeching, unsure of what to do. Dave took a sip of his tea, unfazed. "Bit of a mess, innit?" he observed calmly. "Looks like your Kettle is about to boil over." Krill, recovering slightly from his shock, snapped, "The Harmonizer is malfunctioning. We must shut it down immediately." He barked orders at his subordinates, who scrambled to reach the control panel. "Whoa, hold on there, Captain," Dave interjected, holding up a hand. "You don't want to do that. You'll just make things worse." He ambled over to the Harmonizer, dodging frantic Xylossians, and examined the device with a critical eye. "Needs a bit of adjustment, that's all." Before anyone could stop him, Dave grabbed a wrench from his exosuit, where he got it, nobody knew, and started banging on the Harmonizer's control panel. He whacked it a few times, adjusted a few knobs, and then gave it a final, satisfying thump. The alarm stopped. The red lights dimmed. The synthesized voice announced, "Atmospheric pressure stabilizing. Tectonic activity within acceptable parameters. Planetary integrity restored." The Xylossians froze, their panic replaced by stunned silence. Zorgon approached Dave cautiously. What did you do?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Dave grinned, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Just gave it a good old British fix. You know, a bit of percussive maintenance works every time." He winked. "Turns out your fancy Harmonizer just needed a good whack. Funny that." The Xylossians looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. Their most sacred technology, their planetary safeguard, had been fixed with a wrench and a well-placed thump. It was humiliating, absurd, and utterly undeniably ineffective. Krill, swallowing his pride, approached Dave. "Human, you have averted a catastrophe. While your methods are unorthodox, we are in your debt." Dave shrugged. "No worries, mate. Just glad I could help. Now, about that second cuppa." Zorgon, still reeling from the revelation, managed a weak click of acknowledgement. Perhaps we could study your percussive maintenance techniques." Dave chuckled. I guessed. Just promise me you won't start hitting everything with a wrench. It's not a universal solution, you know." And so the great Xylossian civilization, brought to the brink of destruction by a tea-loving human and his unorthodox repair methods, was saved not by technological prowess, but by a good whack with a wrench. The Harmonizer, now affectionately known as Dave's Kettle, continued to hum, its rhythmic pulses a constant reminder of the day their world was saved by a bit of percussive maintenance and a strong cup of tea. The dust settled, both literally from the kettle's seismic antics, and figuratively upon Xylossian society. Commander Krill, stripped of his rank for failing to grasp the fundamental principle of whack it till it works, now oversaw the communal algae farms, a position he approached with the same rigid discipline he once applied to planetary defense. The algae, surprisingly, thrived under his unwavering gaze. Counselor Zorgon, deeply humbled by the incident, initiated a series of cultural exchange programs with other species, hoping to broaden the Xylossian understanding of the universe and prevent future incidents involving suspiciously cheerful humans and repurposed doomsday devices. As for Dave, he found himself in an unexpected, yet strangely fitting role. No longer just a stranded researcher, he was appointed planetary consultant for applied percussive technologies. His office, located conveniently next to the Harmonizer, or Dave's Kettle, was filled with an assortment of hammers, mallets, and other blunt instruments. He spent his days advising Xylossian engineers on the finer points of giving it a good thump, often accompanied by a steaming mug of tea. His lectures were unconventional. He'd often interrupt complex theoretical discussions with phrases like, "Now have you tried just smacking it really hard?" Or, "Sometimes the best solution is a bigger hammer." The Xylossians, initially bewildered, slowly began to appreciate the directness of his approach. Production soared, malfunctions plummeted, and the Xylossian planetary defense system, while still reliant on sonic pressure calibration, now included a backup plan involving a very large, very well-aimed mallet. Years passed. Dave, surprisingly content, became a Xylossian institution. He never quite understood their obsession with sonic harmonics or planetary integrity, but he appreciated their tea, once they learned to brew it properly, of course. He even started wearing a slightly modified version of the Xylossian uniform, complete with extra pockets for his tools and a teacup holder. One day, a young Xylossian engineer approached Dave, a look of utter frustration on his face. "Consultant, Dave," he said, "I have been working on this sonic resonator for cycles, and I cannot get it to function properly. I have calibrated the frequencies, adjusted the amplitudes, and realigned the waveforms, but nothing seems to work." Dave took a sip of his tea, considering the problem. He said, stroking his chin. "Sounds like you've tried everything logical." He paused, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Have you tried turning it off and on again? And if that doesn't work, well, you know what to do." He reached for his trusty mallet, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Sometimes the best technology is just a well-aimed whack and a cuppa."